Hello everyone and welcome to this Enterprise Ireland Evolve UK webinar, UK Food and Drink Manufacturing Overview and Sector Outlook. My name is Kevin Fenley. I am Enterprise Ireland's UK Food and Drink Manufacturing Lead based in our Manchester office. I'm delighted to be joined today by food and drink expert Fintan O'Leary, Managing Director of Levercliff for this webinar. How are you today, Fintan?
I'm good, Kevin. Thank you. You?
Great stuff. I'm not too bad now. This webinar aims to provide an overview of the UK's largest manufacturing sector, food and drink, and look towards the future of the sector as we continue to live with COVID-19 and move towards the Brexit date in January. Over to the next slide, Fintan. Before I hand you over to Fintan to discuss his insights in the sector, I would just want to give you an introduction into our work in Enterprise Ireland for anyone who might not know of our work. We are the Irish Development Agency for Trade and Innovation, supporting over 5,000 Irish companies to grow and scale in global markets. We do this through our head office in Dublin and our 40+ international offices around the world. Here in the UK, we have offices in Manchester and London, where our sector specialists support Irish companies with market intelligence and knowledge from the UK, and work with UK-based companies to help them source their next innovation coming out of Ireland and build long-term partnerships with our Irish clients. On to the next slide there.
One second, Kevin.
Yep, no worries.
Let's see if I'm moving for some reason. There we go.
There we go. In conjunction with today's webinar, we are launching our UK Food and Drink Manufacturing Report, which you will see on your screen there, which you will receive after today's webinar. This report was developed in collaboration with Irish consulting firm KnowledgeWorks to provide an insight into the UK food and drink manufacturing sector for our Irish suppliers. This report looks at the key trends affecting UK food and drink today, the profiles of the subsectors in food and drink manufacturing, which might be relevant to our Irish clients, such as dairy and cheese and beer and spirits, and looks at a regional overview of the UK food and drink manufacturing sector, the key companies in each region of the UK, and the particular competencies of those regions. So over to the next slide there. I hope you'll enjoy the report and you will receive it after the webinar, but without any further ado, I will hand you over to Fintan from Levercliff to share his insights on the sector. If you have any questions during the webinar, please put them in the questions tab, which you will see on your right hand side of your screen, and we'll try and get to them at the end. Over to you, Fintan.
Thanks very much, Kevin, and thanks for the opportunity of speaking today. And before I start, the report that Kevin just alluded to is very detailed, and I'm not covering that directly in this presentation, but I highly recommend it. So without further ado, let's crack on. So Levercliff and Enterprise Ireland, we obviously are speaking to largely non-food producers, but suppliers of inputs to the food and drink industry today. A little bit about Levercliff. I mean, we are category management consultants, and what does that mean in essence? Well, category management is the process of buyers and suppliers working together to grow the category by better satisfying consumer needs. And so it's got consumers at the heart of it, which is always the correct starting point, but is also the principle of buyers and suppliers working together. And I will be referring to this throughout, as it very much permeates the advice we give producers. The dilemma for most manufacturers, as we see it, is, and I'm sure this resonates with all manufacturers, not just food and drink people, but you know, there's doing the day-to-day, and the time that takes very often leaves very little time for planning, leaves little time for category management, etc. I'm sure there isn't anyone that would deny that they would like more time to think about the future. And I suppose that's very much where we as a business help our food and drink suppliers. We're largely supply SMEs, but large companies also. But I want also to say that, you know, food and drink input suppliers like yourselves can help food and drink manufacturers. I'm sure you do already, but the principle is exactly the same. If you can help them with insight, etc., then that is all going to help your own sales drive and business relationships with them. We've been going for about almost 30 years now, and we're by and large, we're trusted by the food and drink industry. On the left-hand side, you will see some of our clients, and on the right-hand side, some of our partners, including Enterprise Ireland, Board Bia, Welsh Government, Scotland Food and Drink, Scottish Enterprise, and so on. So we've a very good, we're based in the UK only, but we're very good grasp of the UK and Ireland food and drink industry overall. teeny bit about myself to explain where I've come from. I've worked with those businesses, moved to the UK in 1999, have been here ever since. Started out in financial with Glanbia, moved on to a commercial career and joined Levercliff in 2014. I'm also non-exec director of Crust and Crumb in Northern Ireland, a chilled food specialist. So largely been operating at the coalface, selling into food and drink retailers over the length of my career. So that's that. Okay, so on to business today. We're going to take you through the UK market background. So we're going to start broad and we're going to move on to manufacturing overview, UK food and drink market structure and performance, and finally we'll sum up with current environment for UK and food and drink manufacturers. Okay, let's start before COVID. It was a period, I would say, of steady growth post 2007 global financial crisis. As you can see, the dip there back then. For those of you who have been around since then, you will probably recognize that pattern. As I looked at it myself, I thought, my God, it looks quite benign in terms of, it's all above the line. Three measures there: GDP, consumer spending, and inflation. Having lived through it, it was tough. We all know the food and drink environment has been very tough, but when you take it as an average, it was largely a period of steady growth. COVID has hit. I won't overly dwell on this. We all know the impact. Massive drop in GDP. Earnings are down. People are on furloughed income or they've been made unemployed. There won't be many if any, wage increases going on in the economy. Unemployment is obviously adversely affected. And as per my comment at the bottom, this will increase. We're probably not seeing the true nature of this just yet because, as you can see, as you probably know from the news, we've moved from furlough to a different type of furlough scheme. So, but it does feel like we are heading to a period of large unemployment, as I'm sure it is the case in other countries. And inflation is up also. So the economy has been hit hard, and needless to say, consumer confidence is rock bottom. This is a measurement GfK, which is used by a variety of people. It obviously dropped in April, recovered slightly, and although we can only see up to August, I think it's obvious, very obvious, that consumer confidence is going to be pretty low at the moment. Using another, that same graph I showed earlier, this was a forecast from leading food service providers, MCA, which Levercliff use and advocate. And it's the same chart as earlier, but it was done in probably June time, where they were forecasting, where how they felt the market would recover. And at that time, there was optimism that this was a 2020 issue, hopefully, and that there would be a rebound in 2021. Well, I think it's fair we're heading into a bit of a long winter of discontent, which, and I've just put my own spin on this, which is to talk, we're heading into a U shape. I think 2021 is going to be probably affected. Fingers crossed the circuit breakers and the fire breakers are going to work, but I think we will all anticipate a harder 2021. But you can see there was confidence early on that there would be a rebound. And when you think about what's happened in August in terms of both in Ireland and the UK, there was a strong rebound. So, I would say that there should be confidence that the world will rebound, the consumer markets will rebound once we do eventually hopefully get a vaccine or get out the other end. Trend in total retail food and drink purchased by consumers in 2020. Going to just refer to this briefly. The green bars basically show the increase year on year since the dotted line in the middle is lockdown. So before lockdown, we had this massive spike in panic buying, as you recall. It tailed off. And then, as you can see, by and large has been 10-20% growth in the retail market over that time. So retail's having quite a good time. Then if we look at the behavior of shoppers, number of trips is reduced. So if you look at the green line, so before lockdown again, people were out buying in freezer stores, in supermarkets and discounters, stocking up. Then that tailed right back as people were putting safety first. So it's lower than pre-COVID. They are and focusing on bigger shops and online shops. So I think that's a good insight. I referred earlier to the impact of Eat Out to Help Out, sadly temporary, but you can see the food service market was at a certain pretty steady pre-COVID, dropped off a cliff for obvious reasons, and had quite a strong rebound in August and into early September, which of course has now largely disappeared. Now, I'm going to get on to some consumer insights. COVID has forced us all to change our habits now. Early on in COVID, Levercliff decided to put together some consumer research, and we haven't just done it once, we've done it 4 times, because we were very keen to map the changes in consumer behavior, and that's what we've done. So we've done 4 waves, the most recently in September, and it's really to help identify emerging trends. And our 4th survey largely reveals the habits that have stuck and what challenges lie ahead. Within that, we've identified 4 major households during COVID, which is back to basics, financial warriors, life on pause, and business as usual. And I'll go into each of those individually. So 30% of the population is what we describe as back to basics, where the chief income earner might still be working from home. The majority have no children in the household. They're very much moving to scratch cooking, hence the back to basics. Now, financial warriors, I think we've all been familiar with that. This is a period of where there are winners and losers, and count ourselves fortunate to be in the food industry, or certainly in the retail side of it. You know, there will be people doing very well, but there's a lot of people out there who will be worried about the chief income earner being made redundant. It's across all social grades, and half of those households have dependent children, so there will be a lot of worry there. There's then those people who are doing better. 22% of the population in life feels almost on pause. You know, you're not taking your kids to clubs, but you're earning. You're probably saving in many ways because you don't have the same outputs. So feeling comparatively secure. And then we've got the business as usual household, and nearly 70% of these people are over 45. We know we live in a time of aging populations, and a lot of these people have no children in the household. So that summarizes the lockdown households. And then in each survey, and these surveys are available on Levercliff website, and if anybody wants to ask me for the afterwards for the 4 surveys, it is quite good reading. And the latest view is that these are the 6 takeaways. Online is king. It's had a massive, and it will have a permanent shot in the arm to online shopping ongoing. Anxiety. There's a lot of anxiety around going out, around money. Scratch cooking has very much come back to the fore. Home drinking, clearly, alcohol has done pretty well in that time. Brexit, you know, there is support for local food and drink producers in the UK. I think it's important for you to know that. And of course, people's health. You'd probably be familiar with the feeling of overindulgence during COVID, whether it's drinking, baking, etc. And there's a lot of people increasingly looking for solutions in terms of health and weight loss. And I suppose that's what I would encourage people to do, and I will come back to this later, is, you know, looking at the consumer side of it is what we want to say to you as suppliers of inputs into the food and drink producers. Focus on these things and be aware these are the major needs. In food service, this was a survey done early on, I suppose back in May, June time, and I thought it was worth sharing just to see what the sentiment was from food service leaders. And at that point, and you know, you can see very much there that, you know, many of them were feeling that it would be quite a while, you know, 6 months to yeah, how long will it be before you hit pre-coronavirus levels of turnover? And 6 to 12 months. Well, I suspect now there's a lot of people would say longer than that. And in terms of the landscape, it's expected to decline by 50 to 60% in 2020. I was speaking to a producer, a food service producer, a couple of days ago, and this actually echoed this entirely, whereby sales are back by 50%. They've had a rocking August and September, and now they've come out of it, coming to the end of the furlough scheme. Business is back by 50%, and actually now they've been making long-term employees redundant. So this is a very accurate reflection of this forecast by MCA. So the future outlook, I suppose, is you can see in the left-hand side the different channels of food and drink, both mixing food service and retail. Convenience stores are having a great time because local consumers feel safer shopper locally. Supermarkets, online supermarkets, the Ocados, food delivery takeaway are doing very well. Discounters are doing well, and recipe boxes. And then, of course, the food service trade on the left-hand side really struggling. So I suppose as a summary, in almost simple language, it is retail good from a manufacturer's perspective, food service bad, but as ever, the devil's in the detail, and the detail is in the category. So that's the macro and consumer overview over with. I'd like to touch on the UK manufacturing sector, and Kevin's report goes into it much more detail. But before I do, Kevin's got a few questions, so I'll hand back to him.
Sure. Thanks for that, Fintan. I think that you set the scene pretty well there of the landscape in the UK at the moment. Just before we go into the manufacturing piece of the webinar, I just wanted to run a poll to get a sense of how our attendees are working with UK food and drink manufacturing companies, or are you working with them? So I'm just going to launch a poll here, and it should pop up on your screen. Are you currently working with UK food and drink manufacturers? If you can just input your answer there, I'll give you about 30 seconds and we can see the results then. So thanks, answers are coming in there. So I'll just give it a few more seconds.
I'll enjoy my coffee here, Kevin, while you're polling.
Do Fintan. Yeah, so I might just close the poll now, and here we go in terms of answers. So as you can see, as to be expected, a large portion, 74% of attendees are currently working with UK food and drink manufacturers, and a further 10 are looking to work with UK food and drink manufacturers in the future. So that's interesting, and that kind of sets the scene for the next portion of the webinar in terms of the audience we have here, and hopefully, Fintan, you can help share your insights on that side of we'd say manufacturing for our attendees.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Right. So UK manufacturing, it's the 9th largest manufacturer in the world by output, so very significant. Food and drink accounts for the largest GVA output of manufacturing, which, again, it's quite interesting, isn't it? When you think about the UK, it's dominated by London. It's very often dominated by financial services, and that has probably been manifested in politics historically. But food and drink is important, and I think if there's been a benefit out of COVID, from a political perspective, is I think it has woken up the political establishment to the fact that food and drink is important. If you remember, Michael Gove was parachuted into the role a couple of years ago, which was the first high-profile minister for the agriculture, food and drink area, and I think that influence is sort of carried now through with COVID, putting food and drink supply chain resilience at the heart of the UK. The agri-food chain, the overall food and drink market is directionally around 234 billion, of which 120 billion is contributed by the agri-food sector. And we've also got a stat there, and which I think is interesting, 23.6 billion, which is a relatively small figure when you think about it for exports. And of course, the food industry is not just made up of retail; it's made up of agriculture, manufacturing, wholesale, retailing, and catering. In terms of food and drink manufacturing itself, is responsible for about 29 billion of that. Again, it's really interesting to see that. Large number in itself, but a small part of the overall sector. In terms of employment, I referred earlier to the political impact of food and drink. Well, it's very important in throughout the UK, but the regional areas of Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, where it is a priority sector, and it's priority because of the importance to local economies and the employment it creates. And I suppose if you look here, it's interesting, isn't it? You know, the employees in actual manufacturing, you could argue, is quite low. And I suppose one of the outlooks could be is that, you know, with increased requirements for efficiency and automation, you know, one of the main threats of Brexit has been can food and drink maintain its workforce with the lack of potential lack of immigrants. Then it could be that that level of employment may not automatically go up, but in effect be maintained as it is or go down. UK food and drink manufacturing by product type, again, of interest. You know, eyes are immediately drawn to the number of bakery businesses. Yet comparatively speaking, bakery is not responsible for a whole lot of GVA, so probably a lot of competition and devaluing gone on in that area. A lot of meat businesses, higher value, of course. So again, it gives you a flavor depending on your interests, and of course drinks. Again, very interesting that how high drinks is in, and how important it is in terms of GVA. A lot of that, of course, will be Scotch whisky, much of it which is exported. Thought I'd share this slide in terms of trends, in terms of total productivity, and this comes from the DEFRA Food Pocketbook, which is a very useful source of information. And I'm really just going to draw attention to the rising curve, and I suppose it's an increasingly productive sector. And I suppose manufacturing in the UK has probably you know, been accused of being not very productive compared to Germany and other economies, but food and drink manufacturing in particular is becoming more productive, and this is important going forward. A little bit about the breakdown of the food and drink sector. It's classic Pareto, really. Large companies dominating volumes, 79%. Or 21% of large business responsible for 73% of employment, and 83% of turnover. But SMEs are material in business numbers, and they're also on trend, which indicates they are going to grow their volume share further. Obviously, underscored by the fact that a lot of businesses are under threat at the moment, but the move towards more authenticity and a lot of innovation does come from SMEs. Needless to say, it's been a really tough time for manufacturing overall, and this data was last updated on DEFRA's site 13th of August, so it's reasonably current. So it shows you that despite food and drink probably having had a reasonable good time in retail, it has gone backwards by 1 to 2% in Q2, but other sectors then, like transport equipment, as you can see, having had a terrible time, and areas like pharmaceutical appear to have gone quite well. And highlighting food and drink, beverage and tobacco there. And I think the last slide in this section really is to show you and give you an insight into the origins of food consumed in the UK. And in short, 55% of food consumed in the UK has a UK origin. They are quite heavily reliant on the EU as a second source, which must be a concern to them. And obviously it tails off after that. So again, indicating that the UK is, broadly speaking, 55% self-sufficient. It will differ by sector, of course. So we'll move on to the UK food and drink market structure. And the UK food and drink market, largely, the way I think about it, is largely consists of retail and food service. And when we say retail, a lot of people probably don't realize, but while a lot of online is direct to consumer, from businesses to consumer, most of online sales to consumers is via Tesco, Sainsbury's, Asda, Morrison's, and Ocado being a specialist. So there will be online numbers within the retail numbers. So if you were looking at where should I place my chips in UK food and drink, clearly retail is the bigger, food services smaller, and these are 2019 figures. The market, looking at the retail grocery market, this comes from IGD, something we use quite a lot, when it breaks down the market on the left-hand side into different formats: hypermarkets with really big stores, supermarkets, big stores, convenience retailers, your Tesco Expresses, your convenience stores, Booker and so on, discounters, online, and other retailers. And again, this is pre-COVID, and the trajectory was one of growth, strong growth, compound average growth for the next 3 years of about 3% per annum. And if you want to spend time looking at the individual sectors, we'll come on to it anyway, but online forecast to grow strongly, followed by discounters, followed by convenience stores, with supermarkets and higher formats largely marginal growth, if any. So the predicted growth for hypermarkets and supermarkets, the ones I just mentioned, was limited, so an average of 0.6% over the next 3 years. But this has changed significantly due to COVID. So the comments on the right-hand side are very much my take, built on the pre-COVID forecasts, and the outlook for the big four is largely brighter than it has been for some time. As you know, they have wrestled with the discounters who have far smaller formats for some time, for the last decade, and very much Tesco in particular, their reaction to COVID has been to see this crisis as an opportunity. They lost out to the discounters in the last recession. They're determined not to lose out this time. The format plays into people's hands because consumers are doing bigger shops. They don't want to put their health at risk by going to 4 or 5 different retailers to get the big price. So they are going into the bigger stores and being able to do all their shopping. And that is one of the key drivers. Online, as I referred to, forecast to be growing very strongly, and it's been a massive beneficiary for COVID-19. Again, for the safety reasons, the big four are doing very well out of it because they have the logistics to do it. Specialists like Ocado are doing very well. And outside of this data set, then there's the thousands of businesses supplying direct to consumers via orders from their own website, and I'm sure many of you are buying from those people. So the outlook for online is very strong, and I think that's going to be a lasting curve, a lasting trend out of this recession. Discounters have had a whale of a time, as we know, for the last decade in the UK, following on their previous success in Europe. The outlook was stronger than hypermarkets and supermarkets, but less strong compared to online. It remains bright, but they're having a tougher time because anyone that shops in Tesco now in particular, you know, there's some they are aiming to be as cheap and are as cheap as Aldi and Lidl on price match lines. Tesco are very much using their club card to give amazing discounts. Of course, Asda now are re-energized as well, but through their new ownership, and they are already a low price retailer. Convenience has also forecast to do quite well. The last 5 to 10 years, you know, Tesco's growth in Tesco Express, their purchase of Booker and Premier, and the fascia that goes under Booker. Sainsbury's are second biggest with their Sainsbury's Local. Co-op are now a convenience retailer, as 10 years ago they would not have been. So the outlook is also really bright because of their location close to home in the rural communities, and that again is playing, the crisis has done convenience a big favor in that area. In terms of retail market share, most of you familiar with the words, the big four. Well, you know, Tesco lead the market. This is share, followed by Sainsbury's, Asda, and this is the last 12 weeks to October. And you've got outside the big four, you've got Aldi, Co-op, Lidl, Waitrose, Iceland, and Ocado down at 1.8%. A few slides just to demonstrate what's happening during COVID. And this is share again. This is not growth. So where you see the 0 line, it represents share growth. And by and large, although they're growing, different parts of the sector it hasn't really been manifested in great share growth. But you can see Tesco in particular are I would say reaping the benefit of their revised pricing strategy, and the club card. Morrison's are also showing signs of recovery, as they have had a really tough time in recent years. I anticipate they will have a bit of a bounce now if the new owner strategy comes into play. Co-op have done well, as I alluded to earlier. They're based in local communities, and they've had their CEO, Steve Morels, has played a blinder in respect of just appealing to people's sentiment and attracting a lot of shoppers that way. The discounters have, as I said, had a comparatively tough time, but they are also starting to recover more, and Lidl incidentally doing better than Aldi from a share perspective. Not overall, but in terms of growth in share. Iceland and Ocado are a specialist, of course, and they have phenomenal growth, 20-30% in share, and Iceland have also done quite well. So that's a snapshot of how the retail players are doing. Food service, far more complex market, fragmented is the word we would use, whereas retail is very consolidated. 8 to 10 retailers there dominating 90% of the market. This is MCA again. The market worth 91 billion. Now this is pre-COVID. We don't have any new numbers on this, but it, largely speaking, a low growth market, dominated by hotels, pubs and restaurants, retail, travel and leisure, and the smaller contract catering area. And I won't go into detail on the structure there. That's a useful slide, and if anybody wants more detail of it, I'm happy to provide it. Meal deliveries, I just thought I'd draw this out. It was referred to in an earlier slide, but in the area of food service, that has been one of the few bright points in terms of COVID, is the Just Eat, Uber Eats, the Deliveroo and so on have done very well. And the middle column there is the percentage penetration, which is, as you can see, 56% of the population using Just Eat is pretty phenomenal. So they have had a significant impact on the market. As people are getting really bored of probably eating the same food every week and trying to support local businesses. So that's the end of that section. I'm okay for time, Kevin?
Yeah,
looks like it.
Sure.
Okay. Now, I thought it might be useful to, as Kevin's own report goes into quite a lot of detail, I wanted to give people a sense of environmental factors, I support, environmental factors which affect the manufacturers that you guys are selling into. And government, of course, is a key environmental factor, and the UK is complex in that it's got Westminster, which is responsible for the UK overall, but then you've got the devolved governments in Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland. And I thought I'd pull out detail which around key strategies at the moment, which are important for you to be aware of and influencing your potential clients. There's the industrial strategy in the UK, which came out, I think, early in Theresa May's premiership. The national food strategy, which I'll go on to in a minute, which is currently being consulted on. Tackling Obesity UK, Ambition 2030 in Scotland, and food and drink, and the plans which the Welsh Government has, which I'll go into more detail. So, I mean, having been based in the UK for 20 years and having worked with Levercliff for 6, working with almost all of the public sector agencies, including Enterprise Ireland, including Welsh Government, Scotland Food and Drink and so on, I find it difficult to keep up with the complexities myself, but so I thought it would be helpful if we could try and explain it. Very directly, food and health is largely devolved to the regional governments, and on the left-hand side you will see other areas as well. So that gives you a flavour for what's devolved and not devolved. Then are the broader national things like international relations and defence, national security, immigration, nuclear energy, and tax being an interesting one. So that gives a sense that food and drink is very much devolved, and therefore the regional economies have a large say in what happens to their food and drink sector. Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, they are highly focused on providing direct business support, largely due to the economic development remit. Food and drink is really important to rural economies, as it is in Ireland, and they have vast levels of support in terms of areas like innovation, skills, marketing, and scale up. And you will all be familiar, I suppose, that grants are really important to businesses as they try to scale up. So the regional economies have all been important in supporting their producers in that way via a mix of government funding and EU funding. And that contrasts to England, which has had comparatively little support historically compared to if you are based in Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. I mentioned the industrial strategy. Now, this strategy is very visibly moving to action, and as I said, it began probably early, I think, in post-Brexit and the Theresa May when she was Prime Minister. And I'm just going to refer to the direction of travel here, but there's 5 foundations and 4 grand challenges, and you can read them yourselves, but keywords: the world's most innovative economy, a major upgrade to UK's infrastructure, prosperous communities across the UK. It very much indicates investment, with the first one being a really important one, the government wanting the UK to be the world's most innovative economy. And grand challenges in line with that is encouraging businesses and wanting artificial and data, the UK to be a leader in that area, a leader in providing solutions to the ageing society. They want their growth to be clean, so they're very much focusing on net zero carbon reduction and future of mobility. So the automotive sector being very important to it, and aerospace. So the provisions of this strategy will be increasingly important, and is already becoming increasingly important to UK manufacturers. The National Food Strategy then is something that's is live at the moment. Henry Dimbleby, ex-director, ex-founder of Leon, is in charge of it, and he's the independent leader of it. Currently, part 1 has been published, and it's pretty high level, and the 2 main themes that have come out of it are our most disadvantaged children and how they must be supported, and sovereignty, standards and scrutiny, which is probably best described by the whole chlorinated chicken discussion. So there is a very strong theme coming out that children, that we need to feed our population properly, and number 2, that the quality of food and drink coming into the UK must be maintained. So although they seem very high level, it's very current, as you can probably appreciate, and that's what's been published. There's a whole website on it if you want to follow it through. Part 2 then will be published in 2021, and is more root and branch. It's getting into the detail that's behind the first two themes. Following on from that, then the UK government is scheduled to write a white paper, which will be published 6 months after part 2, and then the final independent review by Henry Dimbleby again will be after that white paper. So while this seems almost, well, there's no decisions in sight, I think it is actually very current, and it's worth keeping tabs with this. I do get a sense that these are not just words. This isn't something that's going to sit on the shelf, so I would encourage you to keep pace with it. Tackling obesity, this was something that came out, was believed to be a key part of the National Food Strategy findings, but actually the UK government came out with itself, the Department of Health, in July, and rumours being that, following Boris's brush with COVID and maybe his own health challenges, that this therefore has actually taken on a prominence of its own. I'm sure there's more to it than that, but that's it's pretty close to the recommendations of the National Food Strategy, and you can see some of the what next. So it will be about supporting people trying to lose weight, public sector procurement, which very low budgets for procuring food and drink. They want to improve that. There are reformulation programs on sugar, calories and salt, and also wanting to tackle it on a global stage with other people, and prevention being very important. So again, another strategy worth paying attention to. Then there's the devolved government strategies. This is written pre-COVID, but Scotland has its vision. It invests heavily in food and drink. It's worth being aware of this. They're pillars of growth. And I suppose one point I would highlight is that the rest of the UK is a massive priority for Scotland. It's already its biggest market. There's been huge discussions around independence, as you know, in the last 4 to 5 years. Well, the front and centre of their strategy is to remain critically important to the UK, as well as their existing international reputation for areas like whiskey and salmon, for example. But it does feel like we're in a time of evolution due to the Tory majority, the strength of it, a growing Westminster agenda, and appreciation of the importance of food and drink. But let's not be fooled, regional drive is really strong in Scotland and will continue. That will continue as food and drink is a priority area. Wales, very dynamic area as well. They have had an action plan strategy for the last 7 years, which has been highly successful. Short term, they've come up with a food and drink recovery plan due to COVID, of which there are 11 points there. And businesses that maybe your potential clients are going to be supported in this area. Another important influencer is the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which has been a groundbreaking piece of policy which has been admired across the world and is influencing other governments, whereby, and this is important, is again not just words, Welsh Government in its actions and are obliged to any investment they make has got to meet these points, and therefore if businesses are getting grants from Welsh Government, which of course they continue to do, then they again have got to prove that their actions are contributing to a prosperous Wales, a resilient Wales, and so on. So again, from your manufacturer's perspective, really important that you're aware of this, because you may be able to talk to them in a way that is I suppose sympathetic. And as with Scotland, a huge regional drive with food and drink sector a priority sector. A couple of slides really. I referred to the changing tide, I suppose, towards Westminster and the industrial strategy and national food strategy. Well, an example of this in action is the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge Programme is funded by a huge amount of money from the ISCF, administered by, I think, UKRI, the UK Research Institute, which you will heard a lot about Innovate UK, operates under UKRI. So I referred earlier this strategy becoming action, and it very much is. Levercliff ourselves, we were one of I think 800 successful applicants for out of 8,000 for an innovation project related to food and drink as part of the UK's efforts to recover from COVID-19. So it is very real. There are businesses out there researching and innovating and using funds coming from UK government to do so. Many of you today are plastics suppliers. The UK government again is incentivizing people such as yourselves in the UK to find ways to lead us out of the war on plastic and find more sustainable solutions. Again, you may have partner businesses over here. It's good to know this. It's also good to know that perhaps and consider there will be food and drinks companies in the UK who may be going for funding, who may need partners with technical expertise in areas maybe that you have. I highly recommend staying close to the UK industrial strategy, UKRI website, and finding out what offers are out there. You may find it's beneficial to your business. And transforming food production, I referred to this earlier. I suppose you could argue that Levercliff project I referred to is related to this, but there's up to 90 million of funding available to help businesses to transform food production, whether it be future food systems, science, technology, international opportunities, investment ecosystem, and a couple of examples on the right, high-tech examples. I won't go into detail, but multi-million pound awards to companies or consortiums investigating autonomous technology in the fresh produce area and using carbon dioxide from power stations to somehow generate food for fish and poultry. So again, you can see, relating back to a comment I made earlier on about the food and drink sector becoming more sophisticated and becoming more efficient, that is the manifestation of this. And the final point in this area, I suppose, is you know, we're Irish. We come from a background of Ireland exporting for years and years and being a very outward-looking economy. The UK is 55% self-sufficient, has always needed imports. Well, part of the whole Brexit spiel of is UK becoming more global, and it looks like it is. I mean, there's a huge amount of support for companies to export more. You can see on this side here that it is one of the higher exporters. The fastest growing exporters is food and drink, and I anticipate that this will continue, notwithstanding we don't know what exactly Brexit looks like in terms of tariffs just yet. And on the right-hand side, another one, which is which manufacturing sectors are the biggest investors. And I suppose food and drink has invested steadily rather than spectacularly over the years. But again, I think with some of the drivers required for more efficiency and so on, that is going to change somewhat. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. So we're coming to the final stage now. And I want to refer to the current trading environment for UK food and drink manufacturers. I suppose the early part of COVID, we had empty shelves, and thankfully we came through that period. And I suppose what it has done is it has proven to retailers that there's resilience in the supply chain very much globally. And that remains important. I'll come back to that shortly, because we're now heading into a tough period again, where that's going to again be challenged, but possibly challenged a little bit differently. In terms of food and drink manufacturers that are retail focused, they've had quite a good time during COVID, notwithstanding which sector of the market you're in, i.e. which type of food you might be supplying. But they've generally had a good time. But the priority that I feel very much for them at the moment is keeping their employees safe. You will have heard of factories closing due to COVID cases. It's the same in Ireland, I'm sure. So on our priority is keeping their operation running during the coming months and keeping up with retail demand. And I spoke to a close supplier of mine yesterday, and they're absolutely rammed up 30% even in the last couple of weeks. Not necessarily panic buying, but just increased demand coming into the winter. But these people are also investing quietly for the future. I would say not marketing themselves aggressively, because a lot of people are trying to keep up with demand, but they're investing quietly for the future. And you know, another feedback, which I'm sure you guys know already, some of your equipment manufacturers, but you know, the view is that food and drink equipment suppliers and people involved in the capital side of things are very, very busy keeping up with manufacturers who are investing. Food service focus, it's really concerning. That I mentioned the supplier I spoke to earlier who was laying off people this week, having not done so through COVID. They've come through COVID, the boom of August and September, and there is no light at the end of the tunnel at the moment. So their priority is surviving, basically. Some of them are living on reserves, some will not survive. And I'd like to think some of them are looking at creating new opportunities, but another part of the retail environment at the moment is that, the view is that retailers, are very much, sticking to the knitting. There may not be great opportunities for new people, new suppliers. Therefore, that impacts maybe food service suppliers who might be thinking, let's try and get into retail. The environment isn't very conducive to that at the moment, so very difficult if you're in food service. Not to say you shouldn't try if you're a food service supplier, you absolutely should. Those with dual focus who supply retail and food service businesses have really struggled with food service, but have, by and large have done well in retail, will be propped up by a strong retail demand. And of course, the impact of this is this will more heavily influence their future strategy given the poor outlook for food service. So Brexit, I mean, the mood is one, well, what does it look like? And it's very hard to know when you have enough problems with everything else that's going on. Brexit almost seems like a sideshow, but it is here. And while there appears to be very little, there has been very little discussion about it according to our network, albeit we are now, there is evidence that the retailers are actually asking suppliers increasingly over the last couple of weeks for risk assessments. So not necessarily coming at Brexit from a cost perspective, as in what's our cost increase, or, we're not taking any costs. Actually more concerned about risk assessing it from a supply chain perspective. Now, I suppose the summary of this section is that supply chain resilience and cost control would be the most important environmental factors to buyers and suppliers. So I'm effectively saying that Brexit it does not appear to be front and center of discussions between buyers and suppliers at the moment within the food and drink sector. It is largely about the things they cause, and we believe that suppliers and buyers are more interested in are the larger discussion items around supply chain resilience and cost control. So with that in mind, what would be our advice to those of you supplying inputs to the UK food and drink manufacturing sector? Well, short term, as I've said, Brexit is here. There's very little that a packaging company can do before the 31st of December to change the fortunes of a manufacturer. So it really is back to focusing on the big picture. There are some chinks of light. I think if you refer to the ASDA change, for example, with the new buyers, ASDA are looking at reducing ranges, as has been the trend in the last couple of years, but also making room for innovation. So I think we have to have hope that by working with manufacturers again and to deliver against changing consumer needs, that there will be opportunities. So a reminder to focus on the trends. These are all trends which are researched, which describe the needs that UK consumers need. And although times are not normal and buyers may have been furloughed and they may be working from home, categories still need to be managed, and your manufacturers that you're supplying to continue to need to be influenced. And that's our advice, is keep influencing them. Don't stop talking to them. Have you got the latest category data or internal sales data? What does it tell you? We've provided you with some good insights today, and there is more behind the scenes in terms of consumer buying behavior. Can you help them in understanding that? Has the role of the category changed? Suppliers of inputs to manufacturers tend to have very good insight into what competitors are doing. What unique insights can you bring to the table? So, and more importantly, I suppose, what solutions can you bring to the table? So focus on the really important stuff is our advice. Just a couple of snapshots of categories here, which I will really quickly go through. There is data out there. Enterprise Ireland, Board B in Ireland have fantastic resources. You should approach them if you need data from us. We can also perhaps help. But if you look at the performance of the category that you may be supplying into, chilled ready meals. Here we have the performance during COVID. It struggled due to the fact that more people were scratch cooking and not moving and not needing convenience foods. That's gradually recovering. with back to school, but that may struggle now again. Frozen pizza and bread, conversely, had a storming time early COVID, but is now tailing off. Is that due to a concern about health and overindulging? It could be. Soft drinks equally had a difficult time during COVID, but recovered throughout COVID. Why was that? Possibly weather related. So these, there is data out there which allows you to interpret and maybe influence your supplier in a different way. So last couple of slides, key focus for those supplying inputs to UK food and drink manufacturers. And I'm very much speaking to you as inputs producers rather than suppliers of ingredients, but consumers still care about the environment. That came out in our consumer research loud and clear, particularly in waves 1 to 3. Price remains a battleground. So a key focus for manufacturers could be to, is efficiency and innovative solutions. It could be automation, etc. And the trend towards online shopping, scratch cooking, home drinking, health and weight loss, they all create opportunities for format changes. So again, whether you're an equipment supplier or a packaging supplier, these are things that can be influenced and should be acted on. Environment, there's no planet B. Going back to the point about environment is a key focus for retailers, and we know Tesco have their closed packaging loop, and all the retailers are on this, and they have their own published corporate commitments to reach, which they will move heaven and earth to reach, and all your manufacturers will need to be working behind the scenes, and many of them are, which you probably know. So to finish up, buyers and category management, again, buyers and suppliers working together to grow the category by better satisfying consumer needs, and many of you are a step further back, but you can influence those suppliers into retailers and food service providers by following some of the steps that I've outlined earlier. Many of you will do that already, and my encouragement to you is to keep doing that and keep influencing that. Don't be put off by Brexit doom and gloom. There are opportunities, and I suppose we fundamentally believe that best practice approach, category management, provides the foundation for successful innovation. And, innovation exists because consumers are always searching for better. And we encourage you to continue influencing, continue coming up with new solutions. That is one of our key recommendations in the current environment. So that is it. You'll be glad to hear. Thank you for listening. I'll hand back to Kevin, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, Fintan. Really insightful stuff. And just read a question in the chat during the webinar. I will be happy to send out the slides to anyone who's looking for them, and I might just add it into the email at the end. We've just time for one question. I'm just conscious it's 11:59. A question came in from one of my colleagues around the capital expenditure. I know a lot of our Irish clients in the equipment and capital expenditure space of food and drink have been biding their time as we wait for investment to pick up. Do you envision that the strong performance in the retail sector will have a knock-on effect in capital expenditure over the next few months?
It would appear so. I mean, the insight into food and drink equipment manufacturers from one of our network being rammed indicates that is already happening. I referred to earlier as well that food and drink retail manufacturers in particular will be investing quietly. I suppose what I mean by that is we all know we're in a very difficult trade environment. Companies are not over marketing themselves. Retail demand is up, which is going to push companies to the ceilings of their capacity. They all know there's tougher financial times ahead, which depending on what happens with Brexit, is there going to be less workers going forward coming in from abroad, and there's a need for cost-effective food and drink solutions for consumers, pointing towards a need for investment and innovation and efficiency. So I would say, yeah, the environment for that is hot and probably will get hotter.
Absolutely, yeah. It'll be interesting to see come January whether those EU workers that are not coming in will have an effect on automation and all those investment down the line. Really interesting. I'm just conscious of time here. We've just hit 12 o'clock. Thanks very much for everything, Fintan. Really interesting presentation. Thanks everyone for joining the webinar. I should say about 50 of us on the call. As you can see, if you click through there, Fintan, you have my contact details. If you have any other questions around the sector, feel free to send them through to myself and I'll feed them through to Fintan and we'll try and get those answered to the best of our ability. The recording of the webinar will be up on our Evolve UK website over the coming days, and feel free to get in touch if you have any questions or queries around the UK market with myself, and I will send through our food and drink manufacturing report in the next few hours. Thanks everyone for joining, and I hope you have a good evening and stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks, Fintan.